Welcome to the cabin. Today we'll be working with a painting technique called layering. If you want to see more videos like this, please check out my channel, and if you want to be notified about new uploads, don't forget to subscribe. Let's get to it. Layering is one of those techniques that is very useful to know when painting miniatures with acrylic paints. In my experience, larger flat surfaces require a bit more of the painter in order to look good, so I've chosen a Bullgor from the Beasts of Chaos range for Age of Sigmar to work with. It has a lot of large, relatively flat muscles, especially on its back, that work great as a demonstration. We want to avoid results that look like this. The goal is to achieve something that looks more smooth. I'm using the same color scheme that I use for all my Gorkin. Check out this video if you want to see the whole process. The model was undercoated with Mechanica Standard Grey and then given a zenithal highlight with Liquitex Titanium White using the airbrush. You could easily undercoat them in any grey, off-white, or pure white color. Now, a fair warning, this paint job is not an attempt to achieve Golden Demon level transitions of color. This is intended to be used for batch painting, not to win competitions. I'm trying to paint a unit that looks great on the tabletop and still looks good if you pick up the models to have a closer look. All acrylic paints have a certain degree of translucency, which means as you apply new paint to a surface, you can still see previous coats of paint underneath. To reach full opacity, you often have to apply multiple coats. This is something we can use to our advantage when layering. When you layer on colors, you apply several coats of paint over an area. Usually brighter colors are used for each subsequent coat, and a smaller part of the surface is covered as you move through the layers. Therefore, choice of color is important. For this example, I want the Bullgors to have a light skin color with orange and brown tones in the shadows. Like I said, this is the recipe I use for most of my Beasts of Chaos, and you can see the list on the screen now. When choosing your own colors, try to gradually move on to brighter colors because otherwise new layers can stand out too much. Of course, you can mix colors in stages to make the transitions even smoother, but for this batch painting style project, I'm keeping it simple. When you've chosen your palette of colors, it's time to start painting. First things first, you need to shake your bottles, since acrylic model paints need to be properly mixed before use. Just give them a good shake for a handful of seconds. If your paint gives you trouble, you can apply mixing balls of stainless steel to your bottles to help with the process. And if you want to get really fancy, you can use an electric oscillating device, like this one, which I was given as a gift by my girlfriend's sister. You will also want to thin down your paints to avoid clogging up detail on the model. The more you dilute them, the more translucent they become. I dilute my paints with water on a simple wet palette that I made using kitchen sponges in a Tupperware container with some baking paper on top. This helps to keep your paints wet, and it's great for mixing them as well. With the paint prepared, the first step is to apply a base coat to work from. Since the skin of this model is the largest area, that's the first area we'll paint. This also means that we don't need to be super neat and tidy, so I'm just using an old cheap brush to apply the paint. I recommend using the largest brush size you feel comfortable with. This saves time, so you don't have to go back to the palette and fill up the brush with paint constantly. Apply the paint all over in a couple of coats. As you can see, my brush is loaded with paint, and I'll just keep moving it around to ensure it's not too thick anywhere. Again, this is an old, cheap brush that I don't care about, but you shouldn't allow the paint to get as far up into the ferrule as I have, since this damages the brush. After 2 coats, the model now has a good coverage to work with. For this batch painting style, I will apply a wash over the surface. This is not necessary, and instead you could start with a darker color or paint in the shadows by hand. But if you want to do a wash, make sure it doesn't pool up too much towards the bottom or the deeper parts by simply moving it with your brush. Allow it to fully dry before moving on. Now it's time for us to start the layering process. I'm starting by applying the base color again to re-establish the tone after the wash darkened it down. I'm using a Winsor & Newton Series 7 size 2 brush for this, and making sure I don't get the paint all the way up to the ferrule this time. On the wet palette, you can control how much paint you load the brush with, as well as checking the level of dilution. I start by applying the paint with small strokes on most of the muscle, but not all the way to the deepest parts. Again, acrylic paint is translucent, so by applying it several times we will achieve a more opaque result, and you can focus each new layer on specific parts to make these stand out. Here is a shot where half of the back has been given that first layer, and you can see a big difference. I think the model is still in its ugly stage, but don't be deterred by that. Using a brighter tone, the next layer will cover less of the surface than before. I'm still using a larger size brush for this. When you apply paint, the heaviest deposit of pigments will be towards the end of your paint strokes. That's why I'm always brushing towards the middle, since I want less pigment on the border of this new layer to help the transition between colors. Try to follow the sculpted details of the surface and apply more paint for the parts that stand out. We're starting to get somewhere now, but it needs to pop a bit more. For the final layer, I'm switching to a size 1 brush, and once again I'm choosing a smaller area to cover. I'm using short brush strokes to emulate muscle strands or sinewy textures on the flesh. For additional layers, you can also do some modeled patterns to help make it look uneven like real skin. At this point, I think we're out of the ugly stage. It's not perfect, and if you look closely, the transitions are still quite apparent, but on the battlefield, it's going to look great. Remember, this is meant for a whole army and not to win painting awards. With those layers, the skin is done. The only other thing I did was to apply a 50-50 mix of matte and satin varnish once I finished the rest of the miniature. If you want to see how I painted the rest of the details, again you can check out this video of me painting a Gor. But with that, let's check out the finished Bullgor. In my experience, layering is easier to get away with on small surfaces with lots of details. It's on the larger, more flat surfaces that you need to think about how to do it properly. I hope you enjoyed the video and can take some of the ideas with you for your own projects. Please support me by giving it a like and consider subscribing if you want to see more content like this. Thank you so much for watching and good luck with your miniatures.